For decades, America has built its global power on one simple idea. The world needs American leadership to work properly, from trade systems to military deals, from technology rules to democratic values. Washington has put itself at the center of everything. The entire global order was designed with America controlling the flow of ideas, money, and power across the world. This setup worked well when rising nations either joined American interests or could be stopped through economic pressure and diplomatic isolation. But India's rise creates a challenge that America never saw coming. Unlike China, which runs on authoritarian control and can be labeled as an enemy, India forces America to face a harder truth. Here is a democracy, the world's largest democracy, rising to global power without asking American permission or copying American methods. India's success threatens to break the basic story that has kept American dominance alive for years, that democracy and growth need Western guidance. The worry goes deeper than just competition. India represents something that American planners never expected, a non-Western nation achieving modern success while keeping its own identity. This is not about copying American models or joining American-led groups. This is about creating a different path to power, one that other nations in the developing world are watching closely. And that possibility keeps Washington worried. America's relationship with democracy has always been selective. Washington supports democratic movements when they help American interests and accepts dictatorships when they serve American goals. This practical approach to democratic values has allowed America to keep moral authority while pursuing strategic objectives. The story was simple. America knows best how democracy should work, and other nations should follow American guidance to achieve democratic success. India's democratic experiment destroys this story completely. With over 1.4 billion people, hundreds of languages, multiple religions, and huge economic differences, India manages to hold free and fair elections, maintain civilian control over the military, and protect basic rights despite enormous challenges. The size and complexity of Indian democracy make American democracy look almost easy by comparison. Yet India achieves this without American teaching or approval. What makes this particularly threatening is that India's democracy is not built on Western ideas. It draws from ancient concepts of group decision-making, spiritual diversity, and civilizational tolerance that existed before Western democratic theory by thousands of years. Indian democracy includes village councils, consensus-building traditions, and inclusive governance practices that offer different models for democratic participation. This suggests that democracy is not an American invention, but a human desire that can take many forms. Furthermore, India's democratic strength during crises exceeds that of many Western nations. While established democracies struggled with division, institutional breakdown, and public trust problems, India has maintained democratic continuity through wars, economic upheavals, and social changes. Indian democracy has survived military threats, separatist movements, natural disasters, and global economic shocks, while continuing to evolve and adapt. The implications are massive for American foreign policy. If India can succeed democratically without American guidance, then the entire premise of American democratic leadership becomes questionable. Countries seeking democratic transitions may look to New Delhi rather than Washington for inspiration and support. This shift would undermine America's soft power advantage and reduce its ability to shape global political development. More importantly, India's success proves that there are multiple paths to democratic governance. The American model of liberal democracy, individual rights, and market capitalism is not the only way to organize a successful democratic society. India's approach, which blends traditional consensus building with modern electoral systems, offers a viable alternative that may be more suitable for diverse developing societies. This creates an existential challenge for American global strategy. America's entire approach to international relations depends on being seen as the ultimate democratic authority. If that authority is questioned, America's ability to lead coalitions, justify interventions, and maintain alliances becomes severely weakened. India's democratic rise does not just compete with American power, it challenges the foundation of American legitimacy. America's global dominance has always depended on its ability to influence, pressure, or control emerging powers, whether through economic sanctions, military alliances, intelligence operations, or diplomatic isolation. The U.S. has maintained control over the global order by ensuring that rising nations remain dependent on American systems. Even adversaries like China can be managed through trade relationships, technology restrictions, and international pressure. India presents a fundamentally different challenge. It refuses to be controlled, influenced, or pressured into positions that do not serve its national interests. This independent approach to foreign policy is not new. It is deeply embedded in India's strategic culture. Since the Cold War, India has followed non-alignment, refusing to choose between competing superpowers. In today's multipolar world, this tradition has evolved into strategic autonomy, a policy that emphasizes India's right to act in its own interests regardless of external pressure. This creates serious problems for Washington, particularly during global crises when the U.S. expects clear alignment. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine provides a perfect example. While America rallied NATO and Western allies to isolate Russia, India continued buying discounted Russian oil, maintained diplomatic relations with Moscow, and refused to join UN resolutions condemning Russia. Washington applied diplomatic pressure, lobbied behind closed doors, and sent high-level officials to persuade India. But India did not change its position. The reason America fears this behavior is simple. India is immune to the tools of pressure that the U.S. has successfully used on other nations. It cannot be threatened with sanctions easily because its economy is large, diversified, and increasingly self-sufficient. It cannot be diplomatically isolated because of its central role in organizations like the G20, BRICS, SCO, and its strong bilateral relationships with multiple regional powers across Asia, Africa, and Europe. It cannot be intimidated militarily because of its own nuclear weapons, growing defense capabilities, and strategic partnerships with multiple powers, including Russia, France, Israel, and yes, even the U.S. at the same time. India plays a multi-directional foreign policy game that no other rising power has managed so effectively. It can conduct military exercises with the U.S. while buying weapons from Russia, deepen ties with Israel while supporting Palestine, and promote Global South solidarity while negotiating advanced trade deals with Europe and Japan. This ability to balance contradictions while preserving independence is what makes India an uncontrollable factor in America's strategy. Moreover, India does not depend on Western approval for legitimacy. Its democratic identity, cultural confidence, civilizational depth, and historical experience as a non-aligned leader give it unique credibility in the developing world. Unlike other American partners who are bound by defense agreements, IMF loans, or trade dependencies, India makes its own rules. It does not fear being called undemocratic or uncooperative by Western media or institutions because it gets legitimacy from its own people, not from external validation. The Quad Alliance, which includes the US, India, Japan, and Australia, perfectly demonstrates how India participates in Western-led groupings on its own terms. While the alliance is seen as a tool to balance China's power in the Indo-Pacific, India has never allowed itself to be viewed as an American proxy. It has resisted efforts to militarize the Quad, pushed for broader economic cooperation instead of just security, and has repeatedly insisted that the grouping should not be anti-China in approach. This frustrates U.S. strategic planners who would prefer clearer alignments and stronger military coordination. But India refuses to transform its partnerships into relationships of dependency or confrontation. The truth is, America fears powers that it cannot predict or shape. China, while economically powerful, is rigid in ideology and therefore more predictable in behavior. India, however, is flexible, adaptable, and deeply rooted in its civilizational confidence. In the global contest for influence, power extends beyond military strength and economic size. It flows through stories, values, culture, and the ability to inspire. America has dominated the world stage through its cultural exports, Hollywood movies, fast food, fashion, music, and digital media. China has tried to extend its reach through investments, infrastructure, and state media. India's rise presents an entirely different kind of challenge. It is not just about what India owns or how it trades, but about what India represents. India's civilizational soft power runs deeper than any modern marketing campaign. It is not something created in offices or government ministries. It is the product of a 5,000-year-old civilization that continues to live, grow, and influence the world in quiet but powerful ways. Unlike China's often forced soft power efforts, such as Confucius institutes that are viewed with suspicion, India's influence is natural. It flows through its ancient philosophies, spiritual traditions, arts, languages, and the lived example of its global diaspora. Yoga is perhaps the most visible and widespread example. Once limited to Indian temples and spiritual centers, it is now a global phenomenon practiced in gyms, homes, parks, and wellness retreats from New York to Nairobi. Yet despite its Western repackaging, the roots of yoga are undeniably Indian. They carry with them a subtle but strong cultural authority that reasserts India's civilizational identity. This soft power is not imposed. It is invited. Similarly, Indian food, Bollywood films, classical dance, spiritual literature, and the global reach of festivals like Diwali are reshaping how the world experiences culture. Hollywood stars attend Indian weddings. Global CEOs speak of their meditation practices. International scholars quote Indian thinkers like Tagore, Ambedkar, and Vivekananda. Unlike America's pop culture, which often thrives on rapid consumption and trends, India's cultural exports are layered with philosophy, tradition, and depth. They offer not just entertainment or products, but a worldview. Moreover, India's influence is amplified through its diaspora, not just in size, but in impact. Indian origin professionals lead some of the most powerful global tech companies: Google, Microsoft, IBM, Adobe, and now even Starbucks. Indian doctors, engineers, academics, and entrepreneurs have established a reputation for excellence across continents, but more importantly, they bring with them elements of Indian identity, family values, educational emphasis, spirituality, and humility that subtly influence their host societies. Unlike China's state-controlled overseas operations, the Indian diaspora is not a government tool. It is a living extension of the nation's culture. It doesn't need direction from New Delhi to make an impact. Its influence is natural and cumulative. In contrast to the fear or suspicion that sometimes greets Chinese investments or students abroad, the Indian diaspora is often welcomed, respected, and integrated. This creates a serious concern for American policymakers. The U.S. has long used its cultural dominance to reinforce its geopolitical power. From promoting democracy through Hollywood storytelling to defining freedom through music and literature, America's soft power has been central to its global leadership. But with India emerging as an alternative source of inspiration, especially among younger generations seeking meaning, balance, and cultural identity, America's control over cultural influence is beginning to weaken. Yoga centers may exist in California, but their roots pull people toward Indian spirituality. Tech conferences may be held in Silicon Valley, but the keynote speaker is often of Indian origin. World leaders may meet in Western capitals, but they increasingly quote Indian philosophy or visit Mahatma Gandhi's memorials for symbolic legitimacy. Furthermore, India's spiritual and moral framework presents a contrast to Western materialism. In a world facing environmental, emotional, and ethical crises, India's ancient ideas about dharma, karma, ahimsa, and the interconnectedness of all beings offer a different kind of leadership. This leadership is not transactional but transformational. It inspires rather than dictates. When Indian prime ministers quote ancient scriptures in global forums, or when Indian spiritual leaders speak at the United Nations, it represents a soft assertion of civilizational authority that is not aggressive but deeply rooted in wisdom traditions. What makes India's civilizational soft power so potent and threatening to U.S. dominance is that it cannot be copied, bought, or countered. It is not the product of advertising agencies, military budgets, or technology platforms. It is the result of thousands of years of cultural continuity, spiritual exploration, and global openness. While America tries to influence the world through its medis, An economy, India influences through ideas and identity, and that kind of influence is far more difficult to challenge. Among the most significant factors that shape a nation's future is its population structure. While many developed nations, including the United States, struggle with aging populations and declining birth rates, India stands out as a rare demographic powerhouse. With over 65% of its population under the age of 35 and a median age of around 28, India is positioned to become the world's largest supplier of human capital. This rising wave of youthful energy presents both opportunities and threats on the global stage. And for America, it is increasingly becoming a source of concern. Unlike China, whose demographic future is clouded by an aging workforce and shrinking youth base, India's demographic momentum is not only sustainable, but accelerating. China, once seen as the world's unstoppable economic engine, is now facing a severe demographic crisis. Decades of the one-child policy have resulted in a rapidly aging population, declining birth rates, and a shrinking labor force. The Chinese economy, while still powerful, is beginning to slow under the weight of its own demographic imbalance. In contrast, India is just entering its demographic dividend phase, a period when the working-age population outnumbers dependents, creating ideal conditions for economic acceleration, innovation, and consumption growth. This timing matters. As China stagnates, India surges forward. For America, this means a new competitor is emerging, one that is younger, more dynamic, and filled with the aspirations of over 1 billion people. What makes this particularly threatening to American interest is that India's youth are not only numerous but increasingly skilled and globally connected. India is producing millions of engineers, software developers, scientists, and entrepreneurs every year. Its educational institutions, though uneven in quality, are producing talent that is making waves in technology, healthcare, finance, and academia. Moreover, India's youth are digital natives. They are fluent in English, active on global platforms, and increasingly global in mindset. The reality that America must confront is that India's rise cannot be stopped, controlled, or redirected. Unlike previous challengers who either sought American approval or could be contained through traditional means, India represents a new category of power. It is a civilization state with democratic legitimacy, strategic autonomy, cultural confidence, and demographic momentum. This combination makes it uniquely resistant to American influence while uniquely capable of reshaping global order. What truly unsettles Washington is the long-term implication of India's success. If India continues to rise on its own terms, the entire foundation of American global leadership comes into question. The world no longer needs to accept that there is only one path to prosperity, one model of democracy, one source of innovation, or one center of cultural influence. India's success proves that alternatives exist, and those alternatives may be more appealing to the majority of the world's population. The fear is not just about competition, it's about obsolescence. China challenges America through opposition, but India challenges America through example. China offers an alternative system, but India offers an alternative civilization. China threatens American interests, but India threatens American assumptions. In the contest for global influence, assumptions matter more than interests because they shape how the world thinks about power, progress, and possibility. India's rise does not require the fall of America, but it does require the end of American monopoly over global leadership. In a multipolar world where civilizational confidence matters as much as military strength, where demographic dividends count as much as defense budgets, and where cultural influence flows as freely as capital, India's advantages become America's anxieties. That is why behind all the diplomatic smiles and strategic partnerships, there exists a quiet but persistent worry in Washington. India will never be America's junior partner. It will never accept American definitions of success. It will never subordinate its civilizational identity to Western standards. India will rise as India, not as an Eastern version of America. And that reality, more than any Chinese missile or Russian pipeline, represents the greatest challenge to American global dominance in the 21st century. The world is watching this rise with fascination and hope. For the first time in centuries, a non-Western civilization is demonstrating that modernity and tradition can coexist, that democracy and diversity can thrive together, and that global leadership can emerge from ancient wisdom rather than recent wealth. India's success story is not just India's story, it is the story of every nation that refuses to believe that there is only one way to be great. That is the true source of America's fear. Not India's rise, but what India's rise represents, the end of the Western monopoly on defining greatness itself.